Hola a todos. Welcome to episode 2.2 of the Langringos podcast. Boom, we got you guys. We tricked you. You thought so hard that this would be episode 3. We were hyping it up in the last episode. We dropped the trailer months in advance, and we got you guys way too hyped up. Derek, how are we doing today, man?
Doing well. I'm a little confused as to why it's not episode 3, though. Do you have
Yeah,
any
honestly,
ideas?
as a fan of this show, as an avid listener of this show, I'm pretty pissed off, dude. Do you have any idea why this is not episode 3? Like, where's my content?
I don't know, man. Just kidding. So essentially, everyone, we have another really big misconception that we thought was deserving of its own kind of mini episode. We'll see how long this actually ends up being, of course. But yeah, so last week we gave a little teaser, right, for episode 3 and kind of talked about what that was going to be. That's still coming, but we thought that since we kind of still wanted to include this major misconception, that it would be better to kind of tag it on after episode 2 and before we got into episode 3. So that's kind of what we're doing here.
I'm liking the vibes. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, like Derek said, we feel like this is really important. And then we feel like it's like the biggest misconception that we have heard and we have seen, and is one of the fundamental issues which we are trying to tackle, and one of the things that we are trying to overcome, so you all don't fall into this trap and believe this, because it's something that we've believed in our own lives. And I'll start this off with a personal anecdote as well, and to when I used to believe this. And like we said, this is going to be about the biggest misconception of all, which is, if I only take classes in school, I will become fluent. Or if I just take 3 years of Spanish in school, I will become fluent. And I started taking Spanish in 7th grade when I was just a young 12-year-old in middle school. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can start so early and I can be fluent by the time I get to high school. And high school came around and I did well in my classes. And not to brag or anything, but I got A+ in all my Spanish classes
Good job.
and I performed very well. And I got to high school and I wasn't fluent. I'm like, all right, yeah, I got high school, that'll be fine. I
Mhm.
took 3 years of high school Spanish, got straight A's in all my Spanish classes, got a 5 on the AP Spanish exam. Again, not to brag, just stating facts. And then I'm like, well, crap. Let me see how college goes. I
Mhm.
took a year of Spanish in college, and then I got to my sophomore year, and then that's when I had the realization. I'm like, holy cow, it's been 7 years and I am still at the same level, maybe a little bit better, but I still can't communicate with natives.
Mhm.
And that's when it hit me. And when I reached out to Derek, and you had this revelation earlier as well too, but I don't know why I didn't realize this sooner. But the thing with schools is there's just a lack of exposure when it comes to languages. You're in a classroom setting with other people who are learning languages, which is great, but in order to go out and learn the language, you got to go out and speak it. You can't just be
Mhm.
sitting down doing grammar exercises, reading flashcards, reading literature, responding to reading comprehension. Obviously, that stuff's important. I would argue that certain things are more important than others because I'm kind of biased. I'm not a huge literature guy, and I don't think it's super important when it comes to learning a language. I think learning the language should be, obviously the grammar, the vocab, and then most importantly, going out and actually speaking it. That's a whole other conversation for another time. But learning a language, the reason why we learn languages is to communicate with people in the across the world. And in the classroom setting, we're not doing that. We're communicating with our teachers, which, it's good to a certain extent,
Mhm.
but all we're doing is just learning that foundation, which is important. But we're not actually going out and speaking the language when you actually learn. And it's going to be difficult and you're going to have some hiccups. But that's when I came to that realization. And from there, once I was able to overcome that, then from there, I was able to make leaps and bounds of improvements.
Yeah.
So, Derek, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, it's not enough exposure, simply put, right? And we kind of touched on this a little bit in episode 1, and now we're going in depth, right? We're going into the depths that a high school Spanish class would not go into, um, right? So yeah, it's just not enough exposure, right? Because if you think about like the natural uh, way that someone would learn a language, right? They're just listening and listening like a baby, right? They're just listening for years before they really are able to form complete sentences and complete coherent sentences and really try to tell like a story, right? It takes a long time. And in high school, you have what, an hour of class every day, if that, for a couple of years, and it's not, and then most people don't do anything outside of it, right? So it's just not, it's not enough. That's the thing. It's a good foundation, like you said, right? There are certain things that matter, the grammar, the vocab, and flashcards and stuff like that. It has its place, right? But it's not the be all end all. It's a good foundation, but it's not the whole pyramid.
You bring up a great point, and what I will add on to that as well is the exposure that you do get in the class. Like you said, it's important, but it's not as qualitative and as, as enriching as actually going out and speaking, and hearing native content and native speak and normal everyday conversations. Because yeah, at times you can get used to what your teacher is saying and, understand their, whatever accent they're saying or like the speed at which they talk. But a lot of times, in Spanish classes, I feel like teachers talk a little bit slower, just so that their students can understand them, which is good. It's good to be able to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But up to a certain point, you got to start listening to native speak and not just your teachers, because the teachers are teaching the class and they want you to understand everything. They're going to go that extra step and make sure that you understand what they're saying, whether it's their instructions for an exam, for an assignment, or the lesson of the day. They're going to change the way they talk a little bit.
Yeah.
And also a lot of the textbooks, the beginning textbooks, for, even up until like Spanish 3 and 4, a lot of times are still very beginner level and contain a lot of vocab that is not even really used by natives. I learned a lot of different words that when I went out and actually used them, they were like, what? Like, nobody ever says that. So a lot of times the stuff that's taught is wrong. And B, like we said, a lot of times, and this isn't the teacher's fault at all, but a lot of times it's just the way the classes are, is that a lot of the content is taught very slowly and methodically, not at a native pace. And that's why you got to go out and listen to natives talk. Even if you don't understand a word they're saying, you're like, oh my gosh, they're speaking so fast. That's what I thought at first. And all it takes is just time, getting used to that speed. It's like anything. It's like learning a new sport. Or, you're going from high school basketball to AAU basketball. You're going from high school to college basketball. The pace is going to be different. Unfortunately, the only way you're going to get used to that pace is by going out there and do it and playing.
No. Simply put, if your goal is to speak, right, and what you want to do is be able to speak, you're gonna have to speak. You can't shortcut it, right? So an analogy, because we're big fans of analogies here.
It's a Derek analogy time. I am juiced.
Because you brought up that little basketball tidbit, right? So for example, you're growing up and you're playing basketball, right? You go to your basketball practice and you practice with your team, and maybe that's an hour and a half, a couple times a week or whatever, right? It's definitely going to help, and it will help, especially at the start, right? But there's going to come a time, maybe after a year or two of going to basketball practice, that only doing that will not be enough, right? It just simply will not be enough. So no one's actually going to get good enough to the point where they could go play high school basketball or whatever, unless they went and practiced by themselves too, right? Or they went and like watched and went on YouTube and tried to like copy moves that the NBA players did in games or whatever, right? Or just tried and dribbled by themselves and shot by themselves or whatever, right? It's just to accumulate that exposure to the skill, right? Another analogy similarly would be with a musical instrument, right? And this one we're actually stealing, borrowing maybe from our hopefully one day good friend, Dan at 10 Minutes Spanish, hands down best pronunciation YouTube channel out there. Would you agree, Nick?
110%. Absolutely massive shout out. One of our first shout outs we ever had on the show. But yeah, shout out to Dan, 10 Minutes Spanish. You guys go check him out. He is fantastic.
So he likened the whole practicing your accent and practicing how to speak to someone learning an instrument, right? So there's only so much that you can do. Like if you take music classes, maybe you learn a little bit about the theory of music, right? And kind of how songs get put together and the notes and all that stuff. And you learn all the different chords on your guitar, let's say, or the piano, right? You learn all the different keys, but you're not going to actually become a good performer unless you go and perform, and you have to actually practice that, and you have to get people to listen and say, okay, no, you did kind of a crappy job here. No, like you hit that key wrong, or you, whatever it's called, right? Like you need kind of that feedback loop. You need exposure to other people, right? So other good musicians or great musicians, and kind of trying to take things from them. And that would be like the native speakers in this case, right? And you just need to practice a lot on your own. And just that little hourly, weekly session or couple sessions per week with an instructor, it's just not enough, right? It's a great starting point. It'll teach you the fundamentals, and kind of that could serve as the feedback loop later on. But no great musician only got good, or no great musician got to be great by only doing like little lessons like that, right? Like they had to just be a maniac and practice by themselves, or go to a very, very prestigious school that just was completely groundbreaking with their approach to things.
Mhm. And that's a great analogy too, Derek. And just the fact that we're not asking, obviously we're not asking, but like we're not expecting, nobody's expecting you to be the LeBron James of languages, or the next Steph Curry when it comes to speaking a language.
Mhm.
Like it's all just about practicing and getting good at it. Anybody can do it. We kind of talked about this last episode, but anybody's capable of learning a language. You can't just say, oh, I'm not good at it, I'm not going to learn it. It takes practice, like anything. Anybody can practice it, anybody can get better. And you don't have to become a maniac be like Pete Maravich and be raised by your dad and literally practice basketball 24/7, and only dedicate your entire life to learning a language. We'll talk about this later on the podcast too, but just finding ways to incorporate it into your daily life and find ways to enjoy it. We recommend 30 minutes a day, whether it's speaking or listening. That's going to go a long way. It really is. You don't have to, commit yourself to this massive routine. It doesn't take, it obviously takes some work and some time, but it doesn't take as much as what you might think it is, and what we're comparing to when it comes to Steph Curry or LeBron. Even though the Lakers didn't make the playoffs, Derek, at this point.
Sad day. So yeah, I guess kind of with that, we can go into our next point here, right? And it's a false sense of accomplishment from schools, right? So kind of, the same thing. Everyone here in the US and other parts of the world too have that kind of false sense of accomplishment. They're like, oh, I took a couple classes, I can get around, I can, speak Spanish fluently or whatever, right? It's such a common thing. And it's just, okay, you took 3 years of high school Spanish, and now you're 25. And if you didn't do anything else with the language, you don't speak Spanish, buddy. You might know a couple words, might know a couple words, maybe even up to 100 words, who knows? But it's not any semblance of fluency. Let's be honest, right? The hard truth.
Unfortunately, it is the hard truth. And obviously, we're not calling people out, or we're just kind of, we want to inspire you all to go out and learn it, like we said. And there is, especially in schools, I would say, just because of the whole grading system as well too. It's like, oh my gosh, you're in Spanish 4, I'm in Spanish 2. Oh my gosh, you've got to be so saucy, you've got to be so good. Like you could feel the clout of somebody who was in AP Spanish. Like people would talk, oh my gosh, you got a 5 on the AP Spanish exam. And at the time I was like, yeah, I did. And at the time I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so awesome. I got a 5 on the AP Spanish exam. And then I had that harsh realization too. A couple years later, I was like I talked about, oh crap, I'm not actually fluent. This literally means nothing. You could literally get a 1 on everything, and is like an F in every single one of your classes. Still pick up on some of the material, and as long as you implement it and actually go out and talk to natives and
go after it.
Like, replace the things in your life and consume native content, make that contact outside of class, you'd be 10 times better off than anyone else who got a 5 on the AP Spanish exam. And I would say too, in America in general, and this could be specific to our past school district as well, Derek, but I know there was a thing where if you passed, if you took AP Spanish or if you passed the AP Spanish exam, I couldn't remember.
I think it's if you just took AP Spanish, but maybe if it was
Yeah.
you passed
No, you know what?
AP,
I think it was because I think there was an extra test at the end of AP Spanish that was like, you just got to take this test or something like, or pass the assignment. As long as you didn't fail AP Spanish, you got a thing on your degree or on your high school
You got a whole
diploma.
separate certificate, like a diploma.
And so it wasn't even a seal. It was an extra
No, it was a
certificate.
whole separate piece of paper.
That's right, because it's framed up in my office. No, I'm kidding. But it's uh it was called a seal of biliteracy, and all you had to do was take AP Spanish. And it was cool in the moment. And I like the concept, but essentially what it was saying is you are officially
Biliterate.
illiterate because you have taken AP Spanish.
Mhm.
And not only, that would have been 4 to 5 years of Spanish in school, because you could skip Spanish 4. A lot of people would skip Spanish 4, go straight from 3 to 5.
Mhm.
And like we said, this false sense of accomplishment, like a lot of people worked really hard for that seal of biliteracy, rightfully so. They did good in their classes and they got it. But then a lot of people felt like, okay, I got it now. Cool, I'm biliterate. People would confuse that with bilingual as well. Like, oh my gosh, I'm bilingual. I'm
Yeah.
fluent in Spanish. I've taken 4 or 5 years in classes without having a single conversation with any natives outside of the classroom.
Yeah. No, it's just, it's funny looking back, because it really would get kind of confused for being bilingual, right? And it's like, okay, you can read a couple things in Spanish, good job, right? But that doesn't mean anything if years after your classes you haven't done anything with the language, right? It doesn't mean anything. And I remember a really funny example, actually, my freshman year of high school. So I remember I was talking to some of my friends, and we were in some big group, and they were talking about how I was at like an advantage and how I was really good at Spanish because I spoke Portuguese, right? And this one kid comes up and he was like, "Oh, you're really good at Spanish?" And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I don't know. I was like, I'm doing okay in my classes. Like, I don't really know. And he was like, okay, well, what's the preterite form? What's the preterite second person form of tener, which just means to have in Spanish? And I just kind of looked at him. I was like, I don't even know what you just said, dude. Like, I don't know what that is, right?
The true test.
Yeah. And then I was like, I don't know. And he's like, yeah, see, you don't know anything. And I was like, okay. So obviously, one, knowing the name of the grammatical tense doesn't really mean anything, right? It's not just me being salty, however many years later, I promise. I've gotten over it. But yeah, it was just one of those things that it was like, it just doesn't mean anything, right? And like, had someone said something to me using that preterite second person tense, I probably still would have understood it. Maybe, right? Because there's a similar conjugation in Portuguese. So I probably still would have gotten it. But just because I wasn't able to reel it off because I didn't know the name of the tense, I was automatically invalidated, right? That's just one of the funniest things for me to look back on.
And that was that was your first time you took the seal of biliteracy test, right? That was it.
No, this was my freshman year. So
No,
this was
yeah. In other words,
I was
that
in
is
Spanish 1. I was in Spanish 1, and this other guy was in Spanish 2. And Spanish 2, I believe, is when you start learning the past tense. You don't touch it in Spanish 1. So he thought he was just super cool because he knew something I didn't. And I was like, okay, I wasn't even trying to like show off in the first place, right? It was just my friends were saying stuff. So they kind of put me in this position. But anyways.
So to clarify, the seal of biliteracy test was not what your friend asked you. It was just
no, because he didn't have it either at the time. He might have gotten it later. I don't know.
Yeah, he wasn't at peak clout.
No,
he didn't have it.
No.
Well, I think this second reasoning behind this misconception leads straight into the third one, and that this false sense of accomplishment also is very similar to a lack of importance and lack of stress on importance of actually learning another language in classes. And I have had some teachers who definitely have stressed it, but a lot of times I haven't. And a lot of times in this kind of school in general, you can just get some bad teachers per se, who just don't really have a passion behind languages at all. And I feel like this is even more important because a lot of people would just show up to class and be like, all right, it's just another class. Um, I'm going to show up, I'm going to get good grades in it, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And I think these language classes are just, I'm not saying they're more important than other ones, but also I kind of am because I'm biased and I love languages. But I think this importance really needs to be stressed as to far as really what are the benefits of learning the languages and, identifying and letting your students know what could happen if they actually take this class seriously and really, really try and learn the material and also apply it. Because I really didn't have a whole lot of teachers who told me, all right, you guys need to learn this, and then, or give us assignments that involve native material, or give us, inspiration and, push us to go out and, do stuff on our own and talk to natives or listen to music or watch TV shows. No one really ever taught us about that. Like, it was always like, all right, welcome to class, first day, here's my name. Here's where I'm from. I love this language. You all should go out and learn Spanish. Hola, vamos, let's do it. Like, it wasn't
Yeah.
a whole lot. All right, here's like the benefits of learning other languages. You all should take this really seriously. If you don't have the passion for it, that's totally fine. But here are the benefits that have happened in my life. Here's how learning languages have changed my life. The amount of people you can talk with. Granted, this is like a little another. This is trailer 2 for episode 3 of all the benefits
Yeah.
of learning another language. But just everything that it does for you and the passion behind that and harnessing that passion from day one until the last day of the trimester, semester, academic year, or whatever, system your school is on, that is so important. And that's, that constant motivation and constant accountability on your students and letting them know that is huge. And I think a lot of students would actually become more passionate if you provided more material with native content, allowing students to choose their own freedom, giving them more assignments where they get to choose a topic, doing more cultural things, more experiential things. Because like we said, that's what language learning is. It's about exposure. It's about going into these communities and actually talking to people. It's about experiencing their culture and learning about the history instead of doing grammar exercises and looking at flashcards and all right, test vocab quiz on Friday, memorize this vocab sheet, and then never look at it again for the rest of your life.
Yeah. No, that's really what it is, right? That's really what it is. And it's just, and it's not the teacher's fault, really. It's the schools have a very formulaic approach, right? And so many people are in the class just for the grade, just trying to pass. That's just what it is, right? But yeah, the teachers don't really emphasize it, and they could. But it's just okay. Just like a geometry class, go do your homework, come back, bring it back. Awesome, cool, thanks. Stamped A, B, whatever. That's how it is, right? So there's just, they don't really talk about the benefits and they don't really encourage you to go and do something outside, right? And I remember this throughout high school. Every summer, my Spanish abilities would just drop down because I didn't do anything. And I was aware of the fact, but it just never occurred to me that I should do something. Strangely enough, right? And then I remember, like, once I finished Spanish 1, I was like, okay, my Spanish is obviously the best it's ever been at this point. And then when I started Spanish 2, I was like, okay, I needed kind of a couple weeks and then I'll be right back where I was, and then only up from here, right? And that happened every time. So I would learn, drop down, learn, drop down, learn, drop down, right? Just kind of an up and down, generally trending upwards. But so much more could have been accomplished had I just done a little bit over the summer, just kind of kept that stuff fresh, right? And didn't forget it. But just no one ever mentioned it, and it would have been great to know, because I'd probably speak better Spanish now if I had done a little bit back then, especially kind of in those critical years, right? And I don't know if you have anything else to say here. Otherwise, we'll get started on our 4th point.
I would say the last thing I have to add, like you said, with just schools in general, how a lot of time it's just so formulaic. And that's something I've even noticed in higher education, in like my current classes. Like,
Yep.
obviously I love all of my professors, but a lot of times, for me personally, it's just like I show up to class and it's all right, complete your homework, or, read these pages and then show up and just turn in your assignments. And like, granted, personally, I'm not a huge literature fan.
Yep.
And I feel like there is such a high emphasis on literature.
Yeah. No, it's
and like I've taken 3 literature classes the past 3 semesters, not even the past 3 years, but every semester I take a new literature class, and it's like,
not by choice.
no, it's not. It's a requirement. And obviously, I think 1 would be important, but I think those literature classes kind of just sum up the formulaic feeling of learning a language. Like I'm a Spanish major and I'm learning languages, but every semester I have at least one class where I read an excerpt from a book or like a text. And there are times where it's interesting because you learn a little bit of the historical context behind it and the culture of these countries. But a lot of times it's just like, all right, here's neoclassicism, romanticism,
Yeah.
Baroqueism. Like I'm literally just learning about literature and history and reading these books and responding to questions and writing essays. When in reality, and that's like, I'm so passionate about languages, but I just can't stand those classes.
Yeah.
I can't stand them, and I can't even
Because
pay
you didn't like it in
attention.
English, right? You didn't like it in
Yeah,
English. So like,
exactly.
why are you gonna like it in Spanish? It's like it's a little better in Spanish, at least because there's the
Yeah,
Spanish portion of it.
a little bit.
But yeah, no,
It's just there's just so many times where it's just it feels so formulaic, and which in
mhm,
education, I just wish we could see more freedom of of your like here's an assignment, pick something you're interested in and then respond to it, or
yeah,
watch a Netflix show, pick a Netflix show that you're interested in and write about it or say what you liked about it.
mhm,
Or have more of an emphasis on actual conversation. Like I took a class last semester about, and we watched movies every 2 weeks, which was obviously
mhm,
entertaining. Some movies are better than others, and the other movies I'm like,
yeah.
this isn't really entertaining, but for
It's
some
hard to
people it
talk.
was. And then you like sit down every week and you have a conversation about it with your classmates in Spanish, of course.
Mhm,
That's great. Being able to watch native content and then further your abilities to talk in class is great. It's better than, and obviously it's not the professor's
mhm,
fault. It's, but it's better than sitting down in a class. All right, let's read this literature excerpt and then let's respond to questions in class and write essays about it.
yeah.
That's no one's going to enjoy that really. I mean, unless you like literature, obviously some people do, but it's very formulaic. And I think that makes people lose a lot of motivation for actually going out and learning the language because they feel like that's what it's going to take is having to do that stuff when clearly
That
not
they
at all.
associate that with the learning it.
Exactly.
And it's amazing how many people graduate as majors in whatever language it is, right? And aren't fluent,
Mhm.
right? It's weird because it's like, okay, if you're graduating from college, with a major in Spanish or with whatever language it is, right? There's a decent chance you've done it for at least 6 years,
Mhm.
right? And you're not fluent. Like how, and it's just that's how the
And that's
education
why.
system is, and
Yeah.
there are problems in it, right? One major problem here in the U.S. Is that you don't start early enough, right? So
It's huge.
Nick was smart and he started learning Spanish when he was 12. I started when I was 14. Um, and it's just not early enough, right? There was a study by MIT and they said that unless you start before age 10 learning a language, it's like next to impossible that you will reach like a true native level of fluency or vocabulary and stuff like that. Because you think of like a native vocabulary is absolutely massive, tens of thousands of words, right? And it makes sense, right? Because it's just when the brain's developing and stuff like that. And other studies have even said earlier, right? So if you don't start by like 6 to 8, then you're screwed essentially.
Mhm.
And you know, we started later, and we're trying to make up for lost time, kind of thing. That's really what we're trying to do, right? Um, so yeah, it's just something about the U.S. that it's a lot later. Um, for example, a lot of my cousins in Brazil growing up, they started learning English when they were like 5, 6, or whatever. So they took like 12 years of English. They're not really fluent. Some of them are, some aren't, or whatever, right? But like, they definitely are a lot better than the average American that took Spanish classes
Mhm.
for a couple years in high school.
Without question. And I think too, there's just too much of an emphasis, like you said, on fulfilling the requirements. And I feel like a lot of
Mhm,
time it's very superficial. Like granted, every public school district is a little bit different across the country, but ours was, all right, take 2 years of a foreign language. That's your education requirement. Check it
mhm,
off the list. 2 years in a class. And like we said, obviously
mhm,
these not saying these classes are messed up, but you're not going to learn much in 2 years. Like you learn some basic, preterite and imperfect and present
mhm.
tense, but that's not nearly enough. And so it's like, why is and starting, like you said, in high school, it wasn't even required
Yeah.
to take it in middle school, for us, like, and I started early. I chose to start early. And that was, I'm not saying it's too late for me to learn Spanish, become fluent, but not the ideal time to do it. And like the earliest you possibly can start to do it is already past that time frame that you were talking about in that study.
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of time it's just the whole, all right, well, languages, we probably should make our students learn languages. Here's 2 years. 2 years required, and then 3 years recommended. Oh no, 3 years recommended. And I feel like a lot of people, like you said, just took that 3 years and stopped. Not saying it's their fault, they could be interested in other things, but a lot of it was just, like you said, false sense of accomplishment. And that's another requirement, like we talked about, oh, you took your 3 years, you're done. You got a good base of Spanish, you'll be able to communicate. Let's go down to TJ now. You'll be able to talk with anybody down there after 3 years
Yeah.
of Spanish in classes. Like it's just not realistic.
Yeah. No, it really isn't, right? And this kind of ties back to that false sense of accomplishment, right? But it's just the way languages are taught in school. It's not enough, right? And there's nothing, like, I guess, inherently wrong with how they teach it. They teach important stuff. You could argue you could learn a language without really studying the grammar or whatever. It's arguable, it's possible. But it's definitely a lot easier if you kind of have that grammatical foundation, right? But yeah, it's just not encouraged to actually go out and speak, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's awful here in the US that you start in high school, right? It's awful. In other countries, right, like in pretty much all of Latin America, you start learning English around, first, second grade or whatever. It's definitely a lot better, but it's still not enough, just because it's still not enough exposure, because you still just need to do stuff outside, right? Watch movies or whatever, right? Like that's just what you need to do. And one point, I guess, too, we're saying that, like, the ideal age to learn Spanish or whatever. Don't use this as an excuse to be like, oh, I missed the ideal age to learn a language, I might as well
Please
not
do
try.
not.
Right? That's not
Yeah.
that's not at all what we're advocating for. And it's just like, okay, just because you missed the perfect opportunity means you're not going to do something at all. That's just silly, right? Let's not let's not do that.
Yeah.
Because it's never too late to start. Just because you're past the perfect moment. Oh God, I'm past the perfect moment. Okay. Chances are that when you were 10 or whatever, and it was the perfect moment, you were focused in other things. You wanted to play video games or whatever, so you wouldn't have even given the proper attention anyways, right? So
Exactly. And especially
don't get too hung up on that.
as a 10-year-old or even younger as well, it's not your fault at all. You have zero knowledge of the importance of languages back then anyway. So it's not like you're going to sit down as like a 7-year-old and sit down and start watching native Spanish videos and knowing that, oh, if I do this now, it's going to improve me in the long run. No, it's got to be stressed in schools.
I don't
And
know, dude. I had like that knowledge at like 10, definitely.
oh, really?
Yeah, I was watching Netflix shows in Spanish when I was 8. I don't think Netflix existed.
The first ever show I watched, like in my entire life, was Pablo Escobar, El Patrón del Mal. I started watching that when I was like 3, and I understood everything.
Show came out in 2018, so
Oh, shucks, man, you got me. Dang it, lost all my
maybe
credit.
2017. I don't even know when it came out, but definitely was after
Yeah, after my days of tearing it up as a toddler. But yeah, like we were talking about, in all seriousness, like you're not expected to be conjugating the imperfect and the conditional and using the imperfect subjunctive when you're 4 or 5. It's baby steps, literally and figuratively. Obviously, like you learn a little bit you learn some words, the days of the week, or vocab words, and then you start conjugating them, or just having that exposure, building your way up in elementary school. I didn't learn any Spanish in elementary school. There was nothing even talked about it.
Yeah. No, it just wasn't even mentioned, right?
Yeah.
It would have been cool. It would have been cool. We probably wouldn't have given it the right value anyways, right?
Exactly.
But,
Just
yeah.
because of the, like we said, the United States and these misconceptions, and
Mhm.
in general, these, because of the language situation in the United States, we just really feel like these misconceptions can sit there a lot, and they're so common, and we want to identify them and make sure you don't fall into these same traps. And we're not saying we're perfect, and we haven't, because honestly, a lot of these have come from our own experiences and things
Yeah.
that we have believed and we have not have been taught. But
Yeah.
it's a reflection of a lot of our society and our culture in the United States and when it comes to languages. And
Mhm.
we hope we've just been able to identify them for you all. And, hopefully if you, we obviously hope we've learned something and, provide motivation and help you all along the process, because that's what we're here for at the end of the day.
What we're here for. Exactly.
Exactly. Derek, you got anything else to add before we tie this one up in a bow and finally head on to episode 3?
I think we're good with our little mini episode that was not so mini. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I love
we're
how
good.
we said this would be a mini episode and it
Yeah,
definitely didn't turn into that, but we just
we got a
wanted
little
to
kick.
provide all the most important information that we possibly could. We're very passionate about this stuff, as you all know. And yeah, I just want to thank you all so much again for listening to episode 2.2. We're sorry if we teased you all, if you all got super excited. And we're jonesing for episode 3 about learning about the benefits of languages. We promise you that episode is coming up next. We got lots of different things to dive into with that episode. As always, too, feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, check us out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, getting onto Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts coming soon as well. Feel free to give us a follow on Instagram at Gringos Podcast. Check us out on impact89fm.org. Lots of different podcasts on there as well. And lastly, and certainly not least, most importantly, if you all have any questions, whatever it may be, feel free to shoot us an email, lenggringospodcast@gmail.com. We're here to talk with you all, converse with you all, any help you might need, any conversations you want to have with us, in case you do want to talk to us, because we're probably just going to talk your ear off anyways. We promise it's really helpful. But any help you might need, feel free to shoot us an email. Derek, any closing remarks?
Go learn a language. Go start now. Go do it.
Hey, we should start a
Until
podcast like that. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. We'll see everyone soon.
Bonjour.